For 2 years, nobody at Vital Holdings could tell you what Bianca Callahan's face actually looked like. She was the quiet one behind the thick glasses, hair pinned low, gray cardigan, never late, never loud, never remembered. Damien Vitale had walked past her desk 1,000 times without once slowing down, and Damien Vitale ran every dock, every union, every quiet arrangement on Chicago's South Side. He was 37, and he'd never once had to raise his voice to end a man's life's work. That night, he came home 3 hours early and killed the headlights at the end of his own driveway. The house was dark. Nobody was supposed to be on the second floor. Nobody ever was. But there she was, standing in the middle of his study with an envelope still warm in her hand. No glasses. Hair loose down her back. A green dress he'd never seen on any secretary in his life. She turned, and for one long second, she was the most beautiful liar he'd ever caught. He crossed the room before she could reach the door, pinned her wrist against the edge of his desk, and kissed her like a man collecting a debt 2 years overdue. "Got you," he said against her mouth. "Little spy." And she whispered the only 3 words she had left. "Not here, please." He didn't let go. He didn't step back. He didn't ask a single question, because he thought he already knew the answer. He was wrong about all of it, every last piece, and by the time this man finally understood how wrong he'd been, he'd have already lost the one thing he never knew he was holding. If this story pulls you in, hit that like button. It truly helps us keep going. Share it with someone who loves a story with a twist, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Now, let's go back to that dark house in Lake Forest, and to the woman who was never supposed to be found. He didn't release her right away. For the next 3 heartbeats, the room was so quiet that Bianca could clearly hear the heating system running beneath the floor, and the sound of her wrist striking the wooden edge as she tried to pull away. Then Damien stepped back. Not a full step, only half of one, just enough for the cold air to slip between them, and his fingers opened. She pulled her arm free. She could run. The study door was 7 steps away, the staircase another 12 beyond it, and he had moved out of her path. Bianca remained where she was. "Then say it," Damien said. His voice no longer carried the mockery it had moments before. It had dropped lower, dry and almost weary. "Tell me what you want." She looked up at him, and for a second she didn't understand the question. In the 2 years she had worked at Vitale Holdings, she had heard this man give orders to people who could have bought the entire neighborhood where she lived. She had sat taking minutes in rooms where no one dared speak before he did. She had never once heard him ask anyone anything unless he already knew the answer. "You're asking me," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a test. "I'm asking you. You don't have to ask." She heard her voice break on the final word and hated herself for it. "You know you don't." "I know," Damien said. He didn't move any closer. "That's why I'm asking." Bianca lowered her eyes to her hand. The envelope had fallen without her noticing, and now lay face down on the rug, one edge of the paper curling slightly upward. 3 things crowded into her mind at once. The first was the 7 steps to the door. The second was the safe behind him. The safe she had spent 20 minutes standing in front of without managing to open. The safe that was the only reason she was inside this house tonight. The third was something she wouldn't allow herself to name. She was afraid. She was still afraid. The fear hadn't gone anywhere. It had merely shifted, moving from the fear of being caught to the fear of the answer now forming in her throat. "What are you going to do to me?" she asked. "Tomorrow. That's a different question. I need to know that answer first." Damien studied her for a long moment. Outside the window, a car passed along the road, its headlights sweeping across the ceiling before vanishing. "Tomorrow, you'll come to the office at 8 o'clock, just as you do every day," he said. "No one in this house knows you were here. No one will know. Not even you? Not even me, if that's what you want." She understood what he was offering her. He was giving her a clean way out, a night that could be erased as though it had never happened, and she could return to being the girl in thick glasses whose face no one remembered. It was the wisest choice. It was the only choice a person who had come here for the reasons she had should make. "I don't want that," Bianca said. The words left her mouth before she could stop them, and once they were spoken, there was no way to take them back. Damien didn't move. "Be clearer." "How clear do you want me to be?" "Clear enough that you can never tell me later that I made the decision for you." Bianca let out a breath. She thought of her brother. thought of the voice she had heard over the telephone for the past 3 years, thought of every reason she wasn't allowed to stand here, wasn't allowed to say what she was about to say. Then she thought, swiftly and ruthlessly, that if she did this, she would get closer to him than anyone ever had. She allowed that thought to justify her, because she needed something to justify her. "I want to stay," she said, "but not in this room." "Why not this room?" "Because this is where you work." That was half the truth. The other half was the safe behind him, and the small camera mounted in the corner of the ceiling, which she had noticed and counted from the first minute she entered. Damien looked at her for another beat, then nodded, a faint movement, as though he had just signed something. He bent down and picked up the envelope from the rug. He didn't open it. He placed it neatly on the desk, its corners aligned with the edge of the wood, then turned off the only lamp still burning in the study. "Come with me," he said. The second-floor hallway was dark and long. She walked behind him, hearing the wooden floor beneath her own feet but hearing nothing from his. And halfway down the corridor she realized something that sent a chill along her spine. She wasn't being led anywhere. He walked ahead of her with his back turned, leaving the entire distance between her and the staircase open. Not once along the way did he glance back to see whether she was still following. At the end of the hallway, he opened a door and stepped aside. "You can go downstairs," Damien said. "Right now, I won't follow you, and tomorrow morning we'll still greet each other by the elevator just as we have for the past 2 years." Bianca stood on the threshold. In the darkness, she watched her hand rise and remove the necklace from around her neck, watched it settle into her palm, warm and small. She closed her fingers tightly around it. Then she crossed the threshold and shut the door behind her with her own hand. In the darkness, there came a moment when he stopped and asked her one more time, using only a single word, and she answered with only a single word in return. After that, the great house in Lake Forest remained silent for the rest of the night. Damien woke at 5 in the morning because the room was colder than usual. He didn't need to reach toward the other side of the bed to know. The east window stood open by about 8 inches, the curtains stirring faintly, and there was no trace left on the bedsheet except for an indentation that had already gone completely cold. He remained still for another half-minute, staring at the ceiling, then sat up. The house was silent. Margie wasn't awake yet. The groundskeeper hadn't arrived, and the gate outside was still locked as it was every night. He walked the full length of the second-floor hallway and stopped in front of the study. The door stood slightly open. He clearly remembered turning off the light and closing it. Inside, the safe was untouched, the dial exactly where he had left it, without a single scratch. The envelope he had placed on the desk the night before had been moved about 2 inches, and a thin tear marked the upper corner. Someone had opened it and then put it back down. Damien pulled out the sheet of paper. There was only 1 page, typed, so brief that more than half of it was blank. A letter of resignation to the Human Resources Department of Vitale Holdings. "I, Bianca Callahan, Executive Assistant, hereby resign from my position effective today for personal reasons." There was no word of thanks, no 2 weeks' notice, not a single line of explanation. Beneath the typed signature was a sentence written by hand in blue ink, the lettering slanted and trembling so badly that the final word nearly slipped below the line. "I'm sorry I couldn't do it." Damien read that sentence 3 times. Not an apology for breaking in, not an apology for the night before. "I couldn't do it." He set the paper down, and only then did he see what lay beside it. A brass key, about 3 inches long, its shaft darkened to a deep brown by the sweat of someone's hands over many years. There was a small round hole in the head of the key, and caught through it was a broken silver necklace chain. The break still fresh, the metal at the snapped edge still bright. Damien didn't touch it at once. He stood there with both hands braced against the edge of the desk, staring down at the key on the dark wood, and for a length of time even he couldn't measure. He didn't move at all. Beyond the window, the sky was beginning to brighten with the pale gray light of November. Then he picked up the key. He turned it over in his palm, raised it closer, and examined the middle of the shaft, where the metal had been worn smooth. He walked around the desk, sat in his chair, and opened the bottom drawer on the left. There was nothing valuable inside, only things that belonged to no file, and at the very bottom, beneath a yellowed envelope, lay another brass key. He took it out. He placed the 2 keys beside each other on the desk, their shafts parallel, their heads pointing in the same direction. Every tooth matched the key she had worn for 3 years, and the twin key he had kept stored in that drawer since purchasing her father's bakery contract. Damien sat that way for a very long time. By the time he picked up the telephone, daylight had fully arrived, and Thomas Brennan's voice on the other end was alert by the second ring, just as it had been every time for the past 11 years. "I'm listening, boss. Where are you?" 15 minutes from your house. Is something wrong?" "Someone left Lake Forest during the night," Damien said. "Before 5. She didn't take one of my cars." "Find her." There was silence on the other end for exactly 1 beat. Tom knew every detail of Damien's schedule, knew who was allowed through the gate and who wasn't, and Tom knew that no one's name had appeared on the guest list the night before. "Does she have a name?" "Bianca Callahan, executive assistant, 14th floor." Another silence followed, this one longer. "I know her," Tom said. "The secretary with the glasses. Did she take something?" "No." "Then what am I finding her for?" "So I know where she is, and whether she's all right. That's all." Damien looked down at the 2 keys on the desk. "Listen carefully, Tom. No one touches her. No questions, no following too closely, no letting her see anyone around her. No one. Not even you. Not even me," Tom repeated slowly. "Not even you. Boss, in 11 years, you've never asked me to find someone and forbidden me from touching them." Damien said nothing. "She was inside your house," Tom continued, and there was no curiosity in his voice, only the caution of a man who had cleaned up too many things for other people. "On the 2nd floor, last night." "Yes." "Why?" Outside the window, a garbage truck moved slowly past the end of the road. Damien could hear it with perfect clarity through his own receiver, because he had been silent for too long. "Boss, report to me at noon," Damien said. "And Tom, if Rudy asks anything about her, you've never heard that name." He hung up before Tom could ask another question. The room fell silent again. Damien sat upright in his chair, both hands resting on the desk, and before him, beneath the gray light of that November morning, the 2 brass keys lay side by side, every tooth identical, one newly left behind by someone, and the other kept inside that drawer for 3 years. She reached Bridgeport close to 6 in the morning, after taking 2 trains and walking for 15 minutes through the wind. The studio apartment was on the 3rd floor of a red brick building across from a church that had closed, with exactly 1 window overlooking the parking lot, 1 bed, 1 table, and a wardrobe she rarely opened. Bianca locked the door, fastened the deadbolt, and only then leaned back against it and slid down to the floor. She sat that way for a while, both arms wrapped around her knees, until her breathing became steady again. Then she stood and did what had to be done. The dress was folded neatly, pushed to the bottom of a black trash bag, and tied shut. She washed her face with cold water until her skin went numb. She tied her hair back and pinned it low at the nape of her neck. The thick, framed glasses that had been lying on the table since the night before went back onto her face, and in the small mirror hanging behind the door, the familiar face returned. The face that not one person in that building with 14 floors had managed to remember during the past 2 years. That was exactly what she needed. People didn't look closely at a secretary in glasses. They looked straight through her. The night before, when she entered the house in Lake Forest, she had needed to do the opposite. If the housekeeper caught her on the stairs, if the groundskeeper saw her crossing the lawn, they would see a strange woman and call the police. Rather than recognize Miss Callahan from the 14th floor and telephone the office, a stranger could disappear. A secretary had an employment record, an address, and a social security number. Taking off the glasses, letting down her hair, changing the dress, none of it had been about making herself beautiful. It had been about erasing fingerprints. She had planned every detail for 4 months. The only thing she hadn't planned for was Damien coming home 3 hours early. Bianca sat on the edge of the bed and took out her phone. There were no missed calls, no messages. The silence was worse. 3 years earlier, on an August evening, when she was still working double shifts at a diner on Halsted Street and knew nothing about Vitale Holdings except the name stamped across several high-rise buildings, her phone had rung from a blocked number. The person on the other end knew her brother's full name, knew where Daniel worked as an accountant, knew the last day he had appeared at the office, even knew the name of the street where his car had been found. Then that voice said one sentence, only one, and from that night onward, she never slept through an entire night again. The order to have her brother taken care of had come directly from Damien Vitale. She had hung up. She called the police the following morning, and they recorded her statement politely, then never contacted her again. 2 weeks later, the number called a second time, then a third. The caller was never in a hurry, never asked her for anything during the first 3 months. The person simply called, simply revealed one more detail she couldn't possibly have known on her own, and every detail drove another nail into a wound that had never healed. It wasn't until the end of the first year that the voice finally told her what she could do. There was a ledger, the caller said. The proof was inside the safe on the second floor of the house in Lake Forest, a floor none of the 3 household employees was allowed to enter. To take it, she would have to get inside, and to get inside, she would have to become one of his people. Then the caller taught her how. An executive assistant program at a community college, with the tuition already paid by someone else, a certificate in basic accounting, a spotless resume with no mention of the diner on Halsted Street, and no mention of a brother. She learned how to speak as little as possible, how to take meeting minutes, how to stand in the corner of a room without being noticed. She even learned how to choose the right glasses. By the end of the first year, a position opened on the 14th floor, and she was called in for an interview so quickly that it only struck her as strange much later. For the next 2 years, she sat about 100 feet from Damien Vitale's office, recording his words in meetings where he never once appeared to look at her. And every month she sent money to her mother in Peoria, without telling her who she worked for. The deadline had been the night before. The caller had said it during the summer, saying that after that date, the ledger would be moved, and she would lose her chance forever. She had gotten inside. She had stood in front of that safe for 20 minutes. She had 4 combinations the caller had given her. She had tried all 4, and none of them opened it. That was what she would say if anyone asked. But now, sitting alone on the edge of the bed in the bitterly cold studio apartment in Bridgeport, Bianca was forced to face something else. For 15 of those 20 minutes, she had stood there without touching the dial at all. She had stared at it and thought about the man who always moved her chair closer to the window during late meetings so the lights wouldn't shine in her eyes. The man who had never called her by name, but always knew exactly where she was sitting in the room. And during those 15 minutes, she hadn't wanted to open it. Out of a habit formed over 3 years, she raised a hand to her neck in search of the chain, and her fingers touched bare skin. Bianca shot to her feet. She turned her purse upside down over the bed, emptied every compartment, dropped to her knees to look beneath the wardrobe, and even searched through the black trash bag again. There was nothing. Her father's brass key, the only thing left from the bakery that had closed 5 years earlier, had been left behind in that house. On Monday morning, she arrived 10 minutes earlier than usual, wearing her glasses and a gray sweater, with an envelope inside her purse containing her employee badge and locker key, because she had already decided she wouldn't need either of them after 9 o'clock. Throughout the weekend, she had prepared 3 possible scenarios. Security would stop her in the lobby. Human resources would call upstairs first. Or no one would say anything at all, and she would simply discover that her badge no longer opened the elevator to the 14th floor. None of those things happened. Her card produced the same clean beep it did every morning. Her desk remained exactly where it had always been. Her computer still accepted her login, and the scheduling coordinator even passed by and asked whether she had gone anywhere over the weekend. She sat down and opened her inbox. 47 unread emails, none of them from Human Resources. At 9:15, her desk phone rang once, briefly. He wanted to see her. Bianca took her meeting notebook with her as she always did, because leaving it behind would have been an admission of something, and walked the 100 feet of hallway she had crossed more than 500 times. His office door was already open. Damien stood by the window with his back to her, holding a sheet of paper. He didn't turn around immediately. "Close the door," he said. She closed it. "Sit down." She sat. He turned, and she saw what the paper in his hand was. It had been folded into quarters and opened again, and in the lower right corner, the handwritten sentence in blue ink remained exactly as she had left it, slanted and trembling. Damien placed the page on the desk and turned it so it faced her, as though inviting her to read her own words again. "Do you want to add anything to this?" "No." "Did anyone force you to write it?" "No." "Did anyone force you to come work here?" Bianca looked up. He asked the question in the same voice he used when questioning a contractor about the progress of a foundation pour, without emphasizing a single word or looking at her any longer than necessary. "No," she said. "Good." He picked up the paper with both hands and tore it in half. Then he placed the 2 halves together and tore them once more. In the sealed room, The sound of paper ripping seemed far louder than it should have been. He dropped the pieces into the wastebasket beneath the desk, brushed his hands together, then sat in his chair and pulled a thin file toward him. "Human Resources will send you a revised contract this morning," he said. "Your title remains the same. Your salary increases by 22%, effective from the beginning of this month. You don't need to sign anything else. I've already approved it." For several seconds, she couldn't speak. "I didn't ask for a raise." "I know. Then why?" "Because your workload is going to increase." He opened the file and turned a page. "Starting today, you'll no longer sit in the shared area. The office next to mine has been cleared. You'll move there during lunch." Bianca knew that room. It shared a wall with his office, had a connecting door that opened directly into it, and the entire partition facing the hallway was made of glass. It had once been a small conference room, and the reason it had remained empty for 2 years was that no one wanted to work inside a box where every person passing by could see the entire surface of the desk. "That room doesn't have blinds," she said. "No. Can I request that blinds be installed?" "There's no need." He turned another page. "From now on, you'll have access to my entire schedule. That includes anything outside normal working hours. You'll accompany me to meetings away from the office and take the minutes in person. Keep your phone on vibrate. Don't turn it off, even at night. Even at night. Even at night." She lowered her head and wrote in her notebook, mostly because she needed something for her hands to do. Her pen formed 2 words and stopped, because she realized she was recording her own sentence in neat handwriting. The shared area in the center of the floor had 7 people and an emergency exit. The glass office had one door opening into the hallway and another opening directly into his office. For the past 4 months, she had counted every step inside the house in Lake Forest. And now she understood that someone could count every one of her steps in exactly the same way. "Mr. Vitali," she said, "what if I still want to resign?" "Then submit another letter," he said without looking up. "I'll read it, just as I read the last one." He closed the file. "There's one more thing." Her pen stopped. Damien stood, walked around the desk, and stopped about 6 feet away from her. He didn't come any closer. He didn't lower his voice. He spoke in the same calm tone he used in every meeting, and that was precisely what sent a chill down her spine. "Whatever it is you want inside my house," he said. "Next time, ask me." Bianca remained still. She waited for what would come next. Waited for a question. Waited for him to name the thing she had gone there to find. Waited for him to mention anything at all connected to Friday night. He said nothing more. He returned to his desk, sat down, and opened his computer. "We have a meeting with the Port Authority at 11 o'clock, he said. "Prepare the minutes." She stood, thanked him, and left. By noon, 2 maintenance workers had finished moving her computer and document boxes into the glass office. She sat in the new chair and looked out into the hallway. From there, she could see the entire corridor, the elevators, and the door to his office. Then she understood that from the hallway, and from the connecting door beside her, everyone could see every part of her just as clearly. She looked at her own pale reflection in the glass wall, feeling the absolute weight of being watched from every angle. On the other side of the wall, a chair turned, and then everything went silent. That Thursday, Thomas Brennan parked outside the gate of the construction site in Cicero at nearly 10 in the morning, and Bianca stepped out of the car behind Damien, holding her notebook and a stack of account sheets against her chest. In the 2 weeks since she had moved into the glass office, this was the 5th time she had accompanied him away from the building. She had begun to understand why he needed someone to take minutes in person. He never repeated a sentence twice, and he wanted a written record so that no one would be allowed to remember it incorrectly. The site office was a converted shipping container with 3 desks and an electric heater that buzzed constantly. The man waiting inside was named Halloran, the subcontractor responsible for the concrete work on the 3 buildings along that stretch of road. He was around 50. With large hands and a work jacket still dusted with cement, and he rose too quickly when Damien entered. Damien sat in the plastic chair across from him without removing his coat. He motioned for Bianca to sit at the left corner of the desk. "Start recording now," he said. She opened her notebook. "I'll read the numbers," Damien said to Halloran. "All you need to say is true or false." August order. 410 precast floor slabs. Inspection record lists 410. True. Photographs of the storage yard taken on August 19th show 362. Halloran sat motionless. September order, 200 slabs. Physical count, 171. The man raised a hand to the back of his neck. There's always loss during transportation, Mr. Vitale. It happens everywhere. And the warehouse people keep sloppy records. I've warned them several times. October, 350. Physical count, 294. You need to hear me out. I am listening, Damien said. His voice didn't change. That was the first thing Bianca noticed. He didn't raise it, didn't place emphasis on a single number, and because of that, every number seemed to carry even more weight. I've been listening since August. Halloran began speaking faster. He talked about steel prices, about 2 trucks breaking down, about the supplier changing the contract halfway through, about how he had used his own money 3 times that year to make sure the workers were paid on time. He spoke without stopping for nearly 3 minutes. Damien didn't interrupt him once. When Halloran finally paused to breathe, the container remained silent long enough for the hum of the heater to become clearly audible. You have a daughter named Katie, Damien said. Halloran looked up. She's a junior at Morton High School this year, isn't she? No one said anything. Bianca held her pen with its tip resting against the paper. But she didn't write. She made the swim team last month, Damien continued, still using the voice of a man reading a line from an account sheet. You attended her first meet. You took half a day off. He paused for one beat. The girl has nothing to do with this, Mr. Halloran. I need you to understand that I know that. Then he stood. That was all he did. He fastened one button on his coat, nodded to Bianca, and walked toward the door. In that moment, Bianca saw Halloran collapse into the plastic chair. He didn't sit down so much as fold into it, his shoulders falling forward, one large hand gripping the edge of the desk like a man who had just lost his footing. He didn't cry out, argue, or beg. He only sat there staring at the surface of the desk. Damien had already reached the door when he stopped. Send the reconciliation statements for all 3 months to Miss Callahan tomorrow afternoon, he said. No one else needs to know about this. Outside, the wind swept across the foundation columns. Bianca followed him back to the car with the notebook tucked tightly beneath her arm, and when she uncapped her pen to record the ending time, she realized her fingertips were so cold that she could no longer feel the barrel. He hadn't touched that man. He hadn't uttered a single threat that could be entered into the official record. He had merely recited the name of a child and the date of a swim meet from memory. She had sat in rooms with him for 2 years, had heard him give orders, had watched people fall silent when he entered. Only now did she understand that true power didn't need to make any sound at all. It only needed to let people see that it knew. On the drive back, Tom was behind the wheel. Damien sat in the back seat reading something on his phone, and no one spoke. At 4 that afternoon, Rudy Marchetti came up to the 14th floor. Bianca saw him through the glass wall, walking down the hallway with the unhurried stride of a man who had never once needed to knock. The door to Damien's office closed behind him, but the connecting door between their rooms remained open by about half an inch, and Bianca stayed at her desk with her head lowered over Halloran's account sheets. Hear me out before you say anything, Rudy said. The Michigan operation has been running for 2 years. The same warehouse route, the same loading crew, and not one additional employee would need to be hired. It's only a matter of adding another line of cargo to the empty space on the ship. I've had people calculate it. Every quarter would bring in as much as an entire year of our port revenue. No, you haven't seen the numbers. I don't need to, Damien. This family doesn't touch that, Damien said. You know that. Silence followed. Then Rudy's voice returned, gentle, almost soothing. Your father said exactly the same thing about the truckers' union in 1979. Then he changed his mind. My father died at 61. You know that too. A chair turned. Footsteps moved toward the door. All right, Rudy said. I was only raising the possibility. Damien had turned his back and was reaching for a file on the shelf, so he didn't see what Bianca saw clearly through the narrow opening in the door. Rudy Marchetti stopped on the threshold for exactly 1 second. He looked at his nephew's back, and there was nothing on his face. No anger, no disappointment, not a single line moved. Then he walked out, and on his way toward the elevator, he glanced through the glass wall of her office exactly once. Halloran's reconciliation statement led to 11 other subcontractors, and by December, reviewing every construction contract from the previous 3 years had become work that consumed every evening. Bianca stayed until 9, then 10, and on some nights until nearly midnight. The lights on the 14th floor shut off automatically at 8 o'clock, except in the 2 offices at the end of the hallway. The connecting door between their rooms, which had first been left open only by the width of a finger, gradually remained fully open, because every half hour there was another number that needed to be questioned, and neither of them wanted to stand up. They worked that way for 3 weeks. Most of the time, neither of them said anything except strings of numbers. Then there were the empty spaces, while they waited for the printer, while they waited for a file to finish downloading, and it was inside those empty spaces that everything began to slip. One Tuesday night, when Bianca carried a file into his office, she found him sitting in front of the screen without reading it. "Mr. Vitale." "It's 11 o'clock, he said. "Go home. There are 27 pages left. Tomorrow." She placed the file on his desk but didn't leave. Beside his keyboard lay a small photograph turned face down, one she had seen for 2 years and had never once seen anyone turn over. "Is today a special day?" she asked. He looked at her for a moment. "It's my mother's birthday." She didn't ask anything else. She remained standing there, and he continued without looking at her. "She died when I was 12, that March. By the time I came home from school, the house was already full of strangers." He turned the pen between 2 fingers. "My father wouldn't let me into her room. He told me to go upstairs and change my clothes. That evening, after everyone had left, he called me down to the kitchen and said exactly one sentence to me." "What did he say?" "From now on, no one cries in this house. When people cry, they show others where to strike." Damien set down the pen. "He said that to a 12-year-old boy, and I believed it for 25 years. Bianca remained still. She knew she should offer some polite sentence and leave. She didn't. "Did you cry?" she asked. "No. Not even once?" "Not even once." He looked up. "You think that's pitiful?" "I think it's frightening," she said. For several seconds, he gave no response. Then the corner of his mouth moved, though it wasn't quite a smile. "You're more direct than I thought." "I'm sorry. Don't apologize for that." The following Thursday night, it was her turn. They were reconciling the payroll records for a construction crew on the west side, and one expense line listed bread and coffee for the night shift. She stared at it longer than necessary. "Is there a problem?" Damien asked. "No, it's only that my father used to sell these too." She turned to another page. "He owned a bakery." Damien said nothing, and that silence became an open space, and she stepped into it because it was late and because she was tired. "He woke up at 3 o'clock every morning, every day, for 28 years, she said. "The dough was mixed the night before. He used to say dough needed its own time and couldn't be forced. I grew up inside that smell. Even now, whenever I pass a bakery, I can tell which stage they're at just by breathing it in." "What happened to the bakery?" "It closed 5 years ago." She kept her voice level. "He died in the spring. We tried to keep it open for another 4 months. We couldn't. The metal gate is still pulled down now. No one has rented the place. Who is we?" Bianca paused for exactly 1 beat. "My mother and me," she said. "My mother lives in Peoria now." She lowered her eyes to the page. "That bakery was all my father had. It was in Bridgeport, on a street where people used to line up all the way onto the sidewalk in the mornings. And I still think that maybe if I'd been a little better, it wouldn't have had to close." "How old were you then?" 22. "Then you couldn't have been better," he said. "No one at 22 can be better." She looked up, and he was watching her. The width of a desk separated them, and neither of them moved closer. "What was the bakery called?" Damien asked. She answered without thinking. "Callahan's." He said nothing. In the corner of the room, the printer finished its final page and fell silent. Bianca waited. 1 second passed, then 2, then 4. He was still looking at her, but his eyes were no longer focused on her face. They had settled on some point beyond her shoulder, and his entire expression had gone still in a way she had never seen during the past 2 years. Not even inside the container in Cicero. The hand resting on the desk didn't move a single finger. She counted to 7. 7 seconds was too long for a name. "Callahan," he said. Nothing more. Then he pulled the file toward himself and opened it to the next page. "This expense line combines all 3 crews. Separate it and reconcile it against the September timesheets." His voice returned completely to normal, so quickly that if she hadn't counted all 7 seconds, she would have believed she had imagined it. "Yes." "Have it to me before 10 tomorrow." "Yes." She gathered the file and returned to her office. She sat down, opened the timesheet file, and stared at the screen without being able to read a single word. Over the past 3 weeks, she had told this man about her father, about the smell of rising dough at 3 in the morning, about the metal gate pulled down in Bridgeport, and she had told him because she was tired, because it was late, because he had spoken first. She had forgotten why she was sitting one wall away from him. On the other side of that wall, there was no sound of a chair turning. There was no sound at all, for a very long time. Rudy Marchetti began coming up to the 14th floor more often. Before, it had been once or twice a month. Now it was 2 or 3 times a week. And he no longer went straight into Damien's office. He stopped at the glass wall of hers. The first time was on a Wednesday morning, while Bianca was labeling a stack of contractor files. He tapped twice on the glass, then pushed open the door without waiting. "Miss Callahan, isn't it?" "Yes, Mr. Marchetti." Drop the mister. He sat in the chair across from her, as comfortably as though he were in his own home, and looked around the room. This used to be a conference room. "My nephew makes you sit in a glass cage? It's quiet in here." "Quiet," he nodded thoughtfully. "He doesn't talk much, does he?" "He's been that way since he was a boy. That's how his father raised him." He picked up the pen on her desk, turned it between his fingers, then placed it back exactly where it had been. "How long have you worked here?" 2 years. 2 years. And this is the first time I've spoken to you. See? That's what I mean." He smiled. His smile was very warm, and that was what made Bianca uneasy in a way she couldn't name. "Do you have a family?" "No." "Where do you live?" "I rent a small place. Everyone rents." I asked what neighborhood. She hesitated for half a second. "On the south side." "The south side covers a lot of ground." He stood and brushed off his sleeve. "All right, I'm going in to see him. You get back to work." 3 days later he came again. This time, he brought 2 cups of coffee and set one on her desk. "Drink it. The place downstairs makes terrible coffee. I bought this outside." He sat down again. He asked about the contract review, asked whether she was tired, asked whether Damien made her work late too often, and every question sounded like something an uncle in the family might ask. Then, without changing his tone at all, he said, "I had some business in Bridgeport this morning. 31st Street was a nightmare. They're digging up the sewer lines. Do you take the train to work, or do you drive?" Bianca was holding the coffee cup. She set it down. "I take the train." "That's better. Driving through that neighborhood at this hour would only make you angry." He took a sip. "You're Irish, aren't you? You can tell from the name. That whole neighborhood used to be Irish. It's different now." He said a few more things about how the city had changed over the past 40 years, then thanked her for the conversation and went into Damien's office. Bianca remained still for a long time after the door closed. She had never told him where she lived. Her address was in her personnel file. Yes, but personnel files were kept on the 9th floor, and no one went down there to pull the address of an executive assistant, only to mention it later in casual conversation about sewer work. She told herself that he was the company's second in command, that he had the right to look at any file he wanted, and that she was frightening herself for no reason. She repeated that to herself all afternoon, and didn't believe a single word of it. That evening, she reached her studio close to 10 o'clock. Her phone vibrated inside her coat pocket while she was still putting the key into the lock. Blocked number. She stood in the hallway, watching the screen light up and go dark, then light up a second time. She answered on the 9th ring. "I thought you were dead," the voice said. It was still the same voice, low, slow, and measured, passing through some kind of filter that made it sound as though it came from inside a pipe. In 3 years, she had heard it more than 70 times, and had never once detected a single sound in the background. "I got inside," Bianca said. "But I couldn't open the safe. None of the 4 combinations you gave me worked." "I know you got inside." Her whole body went cold. "How do you know?" "Because if you hadn't gotten inside, you wouldn't still be on the 14th floor. You're still there. You still have your badge. That means you got in and got out." There was a pause. "They even gave you a private office beside his. I have to congratulate you." Bianca leaned back against the wall. "You're watching me. I watch everything connected to that man, Miss Callahan. I have for 3 years. You've been the most pleasant part. Where is the ledger? You said it would be moved after the deadline. It's still there. You lied to me. I'm giving you 10 more days," the voice said without the slightest change in its rhythm. 10 days beginning tonight. That safe had 4 combinations. I gave you all 4, which means the code has been changed. The only person who could have changed it is him. You're sitting 1 wall away from him, and you have 10 days to get that sequence. Bianca closed her eyes. And if I can't, then I'll have to find another way. What way? Miss Callahan, the voice said, and for the first time in 3 years, it slowed slightly. Your mother is 71 years old, and she lives alone in a 1-story house in Peoria with a back door she doesn't lock. I'm not telling you this to frighten you. I'm telling you because you need to understand that in this matter, you're not the only way I have of getting close to that man. You're the cleanest way. Don't make me choose another. The call ended. Bianca stood in the dark hallway, still holding the key halfway inside the lock. Inside the apartment, the landline didn't ring. Out on the street, the siren of a fire truck faded into the distance. And inside her mind, at the same time, were Damien's motionless face during those 7 seconds that had lasted far too long the night before, and one man's gentle question about whether she took the train to work or drove. On the 9th day, the opportunity came to her on its own. That afternoon, Damien told her to bring the entire reconciliation file for the final 3 months to Lake Forest, because he had a call with the attorneys at 8 o'clock that evening, and needed the paper copies in front of him for direct comparison. Tom drove her there at 7:30. Margie opened the door, called her Miss Callahan, and said the young master was in the dining room. Bianca placed the files on the table and sat down to wait. The call lasted longer than expected. Close to 10 o'clock, Damien came out of the dining room holding his phone, one hand covering the receiver. Springfield just called. I have to go. Tom will take you home. He'll be back in about an hour. Yes. Stay here and finish what you're doing. Margie will lock the downstairs doors. She heard the car drive through the gate. The only people left in the house were the housekeeper cleaning the kitchen, and the faint sound of a small radio drifting out from there. Bianca remained seated for exactly 4 minutes. Then she stood. The side staircase had no carpeting. She walked along the edge, where the wood didn't creak, just as she had the first time. The second-floor hallway was dark, with only one wall lamp at the far end turned down low. The study door was closed but unlocked. She pushed it open, closed it behind her, and stood breathing in the darkness for about 10 seconds while her eyes adjusted. The safe was behind the painting on the east wall. She had known its location for 4 months. She moved the painting aside. Then she froze. The handle was in the open position. She raised her hand, touched it, and the steel door released beneath her fingers as lightly as a kitchen cabinet. Something inside her mind screamed that this was wrong. That safe was never left open, but she had been given 10 days, and now only 1 remained, and her mother lived alone in a 1-story house in Peoria. She opened it. The inside was nearly empty. There was no money, no gun, no ledger at all. There was only a thin file held together by a pale blue paperclip, placed neatly on the middle shelf. She took it out and opened it beneath the light from her phone. The first page was typed, with no company heading and no address. The date in the upper right corner was from August, 3 years earlier. The body contained only 6 lines. The second line held a name, D. Callahan, Accountant, Port Division. The fourth stated that the individual had accessed materials beyond his authorized scope and could no longer be controlled. The final line consisted of 2 words, written in the clipped language of men accustomed to giving orders without leaving behind anything unnecessary. Handle it. Bianca read it a second time. She turned to the next page. It was a copy of Daniel's movements during his final week, his arrival and departure times, his license plate number, the names of the streets. The third page was a photograph of the front of the building where he worked. The fourth was blank, except for one handwritten notation in the lower right corner, written in black ink, with a firm, slanted stroke, 3 characters and a period. Initials. D. V. She knew that handwriting. She had seen it in the lower right corner of hundreds of meeting records over the past 2 years. She had placed files on his desk every morning for him to sign, had watched his wrist move in that exact rhythm, had carried pages with ink still wet to the copier. She knew the slight upward turn in the V. She even knew the way he never signed his full name. Her fingers began to tremble. She placed the file on the floor because she could no longer hold it. Then she went down with it. She didn't sit. Her knees simply stopped supporting her, and she slid along the cold wall until her back reached the wooden floor. 3 years. For 3 years, she had believed it with her mind. She had heard it over the telephone more than 70 times, had repeated it to herself every night, had trained for a profession she had never wanted only so that one day she could hold the thing now lying at her feet. She had thought that when this moment came, she would feel lighter. She had thought there would be something that resembled justice. There was nothing, only something rising sharp and rigid inside her chest, and it wasn't hatred. It was shame, because during the past 10 days, every time the connecting door between their offices opened, she had looked up before she even heard a sound. Because she had sat across from this man at 11 o'clock at night and told him about the smell of dough rising at 3 in the morning, told him about her father, and she had been happy to tell him. Because on that Friday night in November, when he had stepped back half a pace and asked what she wanted, she had 7 steps to reach the door, and she hadn't run. She had stayed. And she hadn't stayed because of the mission. Bianca pressed both hands over her mouth. She made no sound. In the kitchen downstairs, the radio was still playing, and the housekeeper was washing the last of the dishes. Beyond the window, the wind moved through the trees. Her brother had been lying somewhere beneath another name for 3 years, and she had just realized that during all those years, the thing she remembered most clearly about Daniel wasn't his face, but the day he never came home. She sat on the floor for about 5 minutes. Then she stood. She took out her phone and photographed every page, all 4 of them, bright enough and clear enough to capture even the initials in the lower corner. She arranged the file exactly as she had found it, returned it to the middle shelf, closed the safe, moved the painting back into place, and straightened it. She wiped her hands against the hem of her sweater. She walked down the stairs along the silent edge of the wood. When Tom returned at 11:15, she was already seated at the downstairs table with the reconciliation file open to the exact page where she had left off, and she thanked the housekeeper and got into the car. During the 40-minute drive back to the city, no one spoke a single word. The phone rested in her palm, slowly growing warm, and she didn't dare look down at it even once. She didn't call the number back. Throughout that night, she sat on the floor of her studio apartment and stared at the 4 photographs on her phone, and near dawn she came to understand something very simple. The anonymous man had told her to look for a ledger. What she had found wasn't a ledger. If she gave it to him, he would use it in his own way, and his way was the way of men who stood in the darkness and called a young woman for 3 years. She had lived those 3 years by the word of someone who was never there, and they were 3 years she would never get back. At 7 o'clock the next morning, she called the switchboard of the federal field office in Chicago, gave her name, and said she had documents connected to a disappearance from 3 years earlier. At 9, someone called her back. At 11, she was sitting in a windowless room inside the building on Roosevelt Avenue, across from a woman in her late 40s with short hair, a gray suit, and no jewelry except a watch with a steel face. The woman slid a business card across the table. Special Agent Karen Oswalt, Organized Crime Task Force. Miss Callahan, I'm going to record this conversation. Do you consent? Yes. You said you have documents. Bianca placed her phone on the table and opened the 4 photographs. Oswalt pulled the phone closer, put on her glasses, and looked. She looked for a very long time. For nearly 2 minutes, she asked nothing, only moved her finger across the screen. Returned to the first page, then the 4th, then the first again. At one point, she removed her glasses, placed them on the table, then put them back on. Where did you take these? Inside the safe on the 2nd floor of Damien Vitale's private residence in Lake Forest, last night. How did you get inside? I'm his executive assistant. I was sent there with some files. Oswalt wrote down one line. Was the safe locked or open? Open. She looked up. Open? The handle was in the open position. I only had to pull the door. Oswalt wrote another line, more slowly this time, then underlined it. Who is D. Callahan in this document? Bianca opened her wallet. In the innermost compartment, behind her bank card, was a photograph the size of a passport photo, worn at all 4 corners. It showed a man in his 30s with closely cut hair, smiling in front of a wooden door painted blue. She placed it on the table and pushed it across. Daniel Callahan, my brother. He worked as an accountant in the port division of Vitale Holdings. On August 22nd, 3 years ago, he left the office at 5 o'clock and never came home. His car was found 4 days later, south of Torrance Avenue. They never found him. The case was closed after 11 months. Oswalt picked up the photograph, looked at it, then placed it down gently, facing the right direction, and close to Bianca's hand. You reported him missing. 3 times. The last time was 2 years ago. Who took the report? The city police. No one ever called me back. The room was silent for a while. Oswald adjusted the watch on her wrist. Bianca couldn't see what was happening behind that composed face. Couldn't see that the woman was weighing something she wasn't permitted to reveal, wasn't permitted to mention, wasn't permitted to let slip, even in half a sentence. Because if she did, one person would be dead within 48 hours, and 15 years of her work would collapse with him. What she did was close her notebook. Miss Callahan, I'm going to be direct with you. In the 15 years I've worked here, no one has ever brought me anything with Damien Vitale's name on it. Not once. Men like him don't put orders on paper. They make telephone calls. She looked directly into Bianca's eyes. So I need to ask you 2 questions, and I don't want you to take offense. All right. Did you alter anything in these photographs? No. Did anyone guide you to the location of that safe? Bianca remained silent. 3 years of telephone calls, a faceless voice, 4 combinations, a deadline, a sentence about a 1-story house in Peoria. She opened her mouth and heard herself say, "No, I found it myself." She didn't understand why she lied. Later she would. At that moment, she didn't. Oswald nodded and continued writing. Then she set down her pen. This is the part I need you to understand clearly. These 4 photographs aren't enough. A sheet of paper with no letterhead, a set of initials, and no witness. His lawyer will tear it apart in 20 minutes. For it to have value, I need him to say it himself. Bianca immediately understood what that meant. You want me to ask him? I want you to ask him, yes. Just once. Don't pressure him, don't bait him, and don't mention the documents. Ask him about your brother the way a sister would ask. Whatever comes out, comes out. She pushed a stack of papers across the table. This is a cooperation agreement. Read it carefully. You have the right to bring in an attorney, the right to stop at any time, and the right to say no right now and go home. I'll still keep these photographs and reopen the case. If I say no, when will you reopen it? Oswald didn't answer. She only handed Bianca her pen. Bianca signed in 3 places. By the 3rd signature, her handwriting had slipped outside the line. At 4 that afternoon, inside a car parked in the basement garage of the federal building, a technician gave her a device, no larger than the first joint of her little finger, and a roll of medical tape, showed her how to attach it to the inside of her undergarment just below her left collarbone, and reminded her that it couldn't be switched off, that it would record everything continuously for 8 hours. The technician stepped out and closed the car door. Bianca sat alone in the back seat. She unbuttoned her coat and pulled down the collar of her sweater. She peeled off the first strip of tape, and it slipped from her fingers and fell onto the floor of the car. She picked it up. She peeled off a second strip. That one fell too. She took a deep, shaky breath and closed her eyes for 3 long seconds, forcing the panic back down into her chest. She clenched her teeth. She picked up the 3rd strip of tape, and this time she managed to fasten it in place. She waited until 7 o'clock the following evening. The 14th floor was nearly empty. The hallway lights had shifted into their nighttime setting, and through the glass wall she could see him still sitting alone in his office before 2 monitors. She had rehearsed that question for 20 hours. In her mind, it had 17 different versions, each with a different way of beginning, and not one of them would come out of her mouth when she stood. She carried a file with her so she would have an excuse. She knocked on the door. "Come in." Damien didn't look up. He was drawing a line through an entry on a printed page, the pen moving across the paper, and he continued without looking at her. "The November timesheets they sent are missing 2 crews. Call them again tomorrow morning." "Yes." She placed the file on the edge of his desk. She didn't leave. He finished writing 1 more line before he finally looked up. "Is there something else?" "I want to ask you something." "Ask." Bianca straightened her back. She had meant to begin with some indirect question about old personnel records, but when she opened her mouth, everything she had practiced disappeared, and what remained was the simplest thing. "Do you know anyone named Daniel Callahan?" He set down his pen. He didn't ask her to repeat the name. He didn't frown, pretend to search his memory, or do any of the things a person would do when caught off guard by a question. He simply placed the pen down and looked at her for 2 seconds, and she understood that he had known this question was coming. "Yes. He was my brother. I know." Bianca felt her heart miss a beat. "How long have you known?" "That isn't the question you came here to ask," Damien said. Ask what you need to ask. She clenched both hands. He worked as an accountant in the port division of your company. On August 22nd, 3 years ago, he left the office and never came home. They found his car 4 days later. She could hear that her voice was still holding steady. Do you know what happened to my brother? Damien stood. He walked around the desk, but he didn't come closer to her. He stopped on the other side, leaned against the edge of the wood, slid both hands into his trouser pockets, and looked down at the floor for a moment like a man choosing between two roads that both led downhill. Then he raised his eyes and spoke. Your brother worked for me. He spoke neither quickly nor slowly, using the same voice he had used when reading the numbers to Halloran. I gave the order that made him disappear. The air conditioning system was running inside the room. Bianca stood there, and she had prepared herself for this answer, had imagined it for 20 hours. Yet not 1 second of those 20 hours had prepared her for what it would feel like to hear it in his own voice. Inside the room where only 10 days earlier, she had sat telling him about the smell of dough rising at 3 o'clock in the morning. Say it again, she said. You heard me. I want you to say it again. I gave that order, Damien said, in August, 3 years ago. No one forced me, and no one suggested it to me. It was me. She stepped back once, then again. Is there anything else you have to say to me? No. Nothing at all? Nothing at all. She reached behind her for the doorknob and had to search twice before finding it. She had thought she would scream. She had thought she would throw something, would say one sentence he would remember for the rest of his life. What she did was open the door and walk out, and by the time she reached the middle of the hallway, she began to run, past the darkened shared work area, past the copier, toward the stairwell door, and she went down all 14 floors on foot because she couldn't bear the thought of standing still inside a metal box for another 40 seconds. Damien remained exactly where he was. He didn't follow her. He had known better than to follow from the moment she took her first step backward, and he had seen the reason before she even opened her mouth. When she had straightened her body in the center of the room, her gray sweater had risen slightly over a small spot beneath her left collarbone, revealing a square shape no larger than the first joint of a finger, in a place where nothing on a woman's body should have protruded that way. He had seen it during the first 2 seconds. He had seen it, and he had still spoken those words. He sat down in the chair beside the desk, the chair she always used while taking minutes, and remained there for a very long time in the empty room. In his mind, everything had already been calculated. Once a woman carried something like that to the federal authorities, they wouldn't allow her to keep wandering freely. They would put her into a protection program. They would change her name, her state, her social security number, and they would keep her somewhere no one in this city could reach, not even the man who still strolled onto the 14th floor without ever needing to knock. It was the only wall Damien could build around her without using any of his own people, without making a single call that might be intercepted, without leaving behind anything Rudy Marchetti could trace. He only had to pay for it with one sentence. He had paid. He looked down at his 2 hands resting on his knees. Outside, 14 floors below, a woman had just stepped through the glass doors of the building and was walking quickly toward the avenue, alone in the December cold, carrying against her chest a recording device that had captured every word of what would save her life. Damien Vitali had never once asked whether she wanted to be saved that way. 3 days later, she didn't go to work. Oswald had called twice, saying the recording was excellent, saying Bianca should rest and keep her phone close, saying there were procedures that required time. Bianca lay on the bed in her studio apartment and stared at the ceiling with the lights off, and those 3 days passed like a single day. On Saturday afternoon, someone knocked on her door. She didn't open it. The knocking came again, 3 slow, unhurried taps. Then an older woman's voice called from the hallway. Miss Callahan, my name is Margie Doyle. I work at the house in Lake Forest. Bianca opened the door. The housekeeper stood outside in the hallway carrying a cloth bag, her silver hair tied neatly back, breathing a little heavily after climbing 3 flights of stairs. She looked past Bianca into the room and said, May I sit down? I'm 74 years old, and standing for long isn't easy anymore. She sat in the only chair in the room. She placed the cloth bag on her lap but didn't open it. I found this address in the house register, where we record everyone who comes and goes, she said. I didn't ask anyone. Master Damien doesn't know I'm here, and I don't intend to tell him. Bianca leaned against the wall. What do you want? I don't want anything. I only came to tell you something, and then I'll go home. She rubbed her hands together. I've worked in that house for 30 years. I looked after him when he was still small enough to need a chair to reach the kitchen cabinet. I'm not defending him, and I want you to understand that clearly. There are many things he has done that I know nothing about and don't wish to know. I'm only going to tell you what I saw with my own eyes. Outside the window, the horn of a train sounded as it passed through Bridgeport. 3 years ago, on an August night, he came home at 4 a.m, Margie said. I know the exact time because I had gotten up to take my medicine, and the kitchen clock read 4:07. I heard the car, then the door. When I came out, I found him standing in the middle of the kitchen, soaked from head to toe, water dripping into a puddle beneath him. It was raining hard that night. She paused for a beat. He went to the sink, took out a glass, and turned on the faucet. His hand was trembling so badly that the water splashed outside the glass. Do you understand what I'm telling you? He had to set the glass on the counter before he could fill it. Then he didn't drink it. He only stood there staring at the glass. Bianca said nothing. In 30 years, I had never seen him like that. The day his father died, he sat signing papers all night, and his hand didn't shake once. That night, it did. She looked down at her hands. I asked whether he was all right. He told me to go back to bed. Then he took his phone onto the porch and made calls for about 40 minutes, standing in the rain without a coat. I watched through the glass door. He made 3 calls. I counted them, because every time he lowered the phone, he stood still for a while before dialing again. Did you hear anything? Not a single word. I didn't try to listen either. Margie raised her eyes. The next morning, he called me into the dining room. He told me to prepare the cabin in Door County, bedding, the kitchen, the furnace, and enough dry food to last 3 months. He ordered me to buy everything myself, take it there myself, involve no one else in the house, and record none of it in the household accounts. What cabin? It belonged to his grandmother. No one had used it for more than 10 years. Nobody even went there in the summer. She tightened her grip on the handles of the cloth bag. I asked who I was preparing it for. He looked at me for a while, then said, Mrs. Doyle, several people will be staying there, and you must never ask their names, never mention them to anyone, not even to me. Those were his exact words, not even to me. Did you go there? Once, to deliver the supplies. I left everything on the porch and came home, exactly as he instructed. I didn't look inside the house. She paused. But I saw a car parked on the access road behind the property, Illinois plates. I still remember the license number after 3 years, because I have a habit of remembering numbers. You remember it? I do, but I'm not giving it to you, Margie said. I don't know what you're searching for. I only know that for the past 3 years, every August he stopped sleeping, and every August I find him sitting alone in the kitchen at 4 a.m. She stood and placed the cloth bag on the table. I brought you some bread. You're too thin. Then she walked toward the door. At the threshold, she turned back. I'm not telling you he's a good man. I don't know what kind of man he is. I'm 74 years old, and I stopped dividing people into good and bad a long time ago. I only know that something very serious happened that night, and the man standing in my kitchen at 4 a.m. wasn't a man who had benefited from it. The door closed. Bianca stood in the middle of the room for about 15 minutes. Then she picked up her coat and went down to the street. She called Thomas Brennan from a payphone on the corner, and he answered on the second ring. 40 minutes later, the black car stopped across the street. Tom didn't get out. He lowered the window and passed an envelope through the opening. I didn't give you this. Bianca took it. And you never called me. The window rose and the car drove away. She opened the envelope beneath a streetlight. Inside were 3 printed bank statements from an account bearing no familiar name. Only a string of numbers and a bank code. The outgoing transfer column repeated the same entry, once every month. On the second day, exactly $8,400. Not one month was missing. Not one payment differed by a single cent. 3 years in a row. And in the final column was the name of the bank branch receiving the money, followed by the same small printed line, Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin. She rented a car on Sunday morning and left the city at 6:15. 4 hours driving north, past Milwaukee, past Green Bay, then onto a state road that followed the shoreline of the bay. The night before, she had found the cabin listed in the county property records, a parcel still registered to a woman who had died in 1997. Never transferred, never sold. Throughout those 4 hours, she didn't turn on the radio. She had considered every possibility in her mind until only 2 remained. Either someone was living up there whom Damien Vitale had been hiding and supporting for 3 years, paying them to keep silent, or it was the place where people buried something they never wanted anyone to find. She wouldn't allow herself to consider the third possibility, because that third possibility was the thing that had slowly killed her for 3 years whenever she let even the smallest spark of it rise. The road leading to the cabin was unpaved, with bare trees on both sides and the gray water of the bay to her left. She slowed down. At the entrance stood a wooden mailbox with no name, only a number, and on the circular drive behind the house, there was a car with Illinois plates. Bianca parked about 160 feet from the cabin and remained inside the car for 10 minutes. Both hands rested on the steering wheel. Smoke rose from the chimney, straight, thin, and steady. The smoke of a fire that had been lit early that morning by someone who knew how to build one. On the right windowsill sat a potted plant. On the porch were a pair of adult boots and a small pair of yellow boots, barely 8 inches tall. She stared at those tiny boots for a very long time. Then she opened the car door and walked toward the house. 3 steps led to the porch. She knocked. Inside, someone crossed the wooden floor. The door opened halfway. The woman standing there was around 30, her hair tied in a ponytail, a cleaning cloth still in one hand, and for the first half-second, her face held only the ordinary surprise of someone in an isolated place opening the door to a stranger. Then she looked closely at Bianca's face. The cloth fell to the floor. "Who are you?" Bianca asked. The woman didn't answer. She stepped back, one hand still holding the door, while the other rose to her mouth, and she turned toward the inside of the house and called a name. That name. Bianca heard a chair scrape across the wooden floor, then footsteps. Then a man appeared behind the woman, his sleeves rolled to the elbows, his hair longer than Bianca remembered, a beard covering his face, his body much thinner than before, and he was her brother. No one said anything. Daniel Callahan stood in the doorway of a cabin in Door County, Wisconsin, nearly 190 miles north of the place where his car had been found, and he looked at his sister, and he couldn't speak a single word. Bianca heard herself make a sound she had never heard come from her before. She reached out and touched his arm. She needed to touch him to know. His skin was warm. He was real. Then her knees gave way, and he caught her on the porch steps, and she gripped his shirt in both fists and cried in the way a person can cry only once in a lifetime, without sound for the first few seconds, then aloud, and she couldn't stop. He held her tightly. She felt his chest shaking. "Bye," he said. The name he had called her at home. No one had called her that in 3 years. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." He repeated the same words into her hair. The woman beside them raised a hand to cover her face and turned away. Bianca didn't know how long she stood there. By the time she managed to lift her head, his face was wet too. She touched his cheek, touched the beard, and shook her head again and again, because there wasn't a sentence in any human language she could use in that moment. Then, from inside the house behind the two of them, came a very small sound. Bare feet on a wooden floor. Bianca looked over her brother's shoulder. A little girl stood in the middle of the living room, holding a worn cloth rabbit, wearing a red sweater, her soft, thin hair gathered into a tiny tuft on top of her head. She was around 2 years old. She looked at the strange woman standing outside her home in tears, and she didn't understand, so she did what every 2-year-old child would do. She ran forward, wrapped her arms around her mother's leg, and hid behind her, leaving only one eye visible as she watched. Bianca stood completely still. "Her name is Lily," Aaron said softly. Lily rose. Bianca couldn't take her eyes off the child. "How old is she?" 2 years and 4 months. Aaron bent down, lifted the little girl, and settled her against her hip, and Lily immediately buried her face in her mother's neck. She was born at the hospital near Sturgeon Bay, in April, 2 years ago. Bianca counted. She counted very slowly because her mind was barely working, and when the final number fell into place, she had to grip the doorframe. It meant that when her brother left his office on the afternoon of August 22nd and never came home, this child hadn't even existed yet. It meant that during all those 3 years when Bianca had passed toy stores without ever looking inside, during all those 3 years when she believed that only she and her mother remained in the family, up here, inside a cabin with smoke rising from the chimney and a tiny pair of yellow boots waiting on the porch, a child bearing the Callahan name had been growing day by day, without Bianca ever knowing she existed. She raised a hand to her mouth. "She doesn't know who I am," she said. Aaron couldn't answer. Daniel stood beside them with his head lowered. The little girl peeked out with one eye at the strange woman once more, then pressed her face back into her mother's neck. And beyond them, below the slope, the gray surface of the bay lay still beneath the December sky. Aaron carried Lily upstairs for her afternoon nap. When the footsteps above the ceiling had stopped, Daniel poured coffee into 2 cups and sat across from his sister at the wooden table beside the window, and throughout the entire story, he never once touched his own cup. "Ask me," he said. "I'll answer everything. I've been waiting 3 years for someone I could tell." Bianca placed her phone on the table and opened the 4 photographs. Daniel looked at them. He studied the final page the longest, the one with the 3 handwritten characters in the lower right corner. Then he pushed the phone back toward her. "This is a forgery." "It isn't," she said. "I know his signature. So do I. I matched documents against it for 4 years. Daniel straightened in his chair. "Bye. Listen to me from the beginning. In June of that year, I was reconciling cargo handling charges at Calumet Harbor. 3 containers every month didn't match their listed weight. The difference was less than 2%, small enough that no one would notice. I followed the money. It wasn't going into a company account. It passed through 2 transportation companies in Michigan, then came back to somewhere else. Where? I couldn't tell at the time. I only knew it was a line of cargo that didn't appear anywhere in the records of Vitale Holdings. And I knew this company had an unwritten rule going back to his father's time that they didn't touch that kind of thing." He turned the coffee cup against the tabletop. "I did exactly what a foolish accountant would do. I printed 2 copies, hid one, then took the other upstairs and reported it." "To whom?" "The second in command, Rudy Marchetti." Bianca lowered both hands onto the table. "He listened to me for 30 minutes. He thanked me, said I had done well, told me to keep it quiet, and said he would report it personally. He even asked whether my wife was doing well." Daniel gave a brief laugh that held no feeling at all. 4 days later, the order came. Damien's order. "An order bearing Damien's signature," he said. "Rudy wrote it. He had the code to the second-in-command's safe. He had his own office, and he had a man who had handled the family's paperwork for 30 years. 3 handwritten characters can be forged. What he needed wasn't simply to kill me and be done with it. What he needed was a piece of paper with his nephew's name on it, so that if anything ever came out, the man standing before the court wouldn't be him." She could hear the blood rushing in her ears. "How can you be certain?" "Because Damien Vitale stopped the order," Daniel said. "On the night of August 22nd, I was driving home when another car boxed me in on Torrance Avenue. Thomas Brennan was inside. He told me to get out, leave the keys behind, and call no one. I thought I was going to die that night." He paused. 3 hours later, I was sitting inside a warehouse on the south side when Damien Vitale walked in, soaked to the skin. He threw the same paper you photographed onto the table in front of me. He asked whether I knew who had signed it. I said his name was written at the bottom. He said, "I didn't write it." Then he asked who I had reported to. "You told him." I told him, and I saw his face when I said that name. Daniel was silent for a moment. Erin was 4 months pregnant that night. We hadn't told anyone. Bianca covered her mouth with one hand. He had my car staged where people would eventually find it. He told me to call Erin once, for exactly 3 minutes. Tell her to gather the documents and leave the house within 40 minutes. Then we came here. He looked around the cabin. For 3 years, we've lived on that man's money. The second day of every month. Not a single month missed. Why didn't you call me? That was the question she had been holding inside her chest since she stood on the porch. Daniel didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed completely. I begged him. I got down on my knees inside that warehouse. I said my sister is only 24. She just lost our father. Let me call her once, just so she knows I'm alive. He said no. I asked when I would be allowed. He said never. Not while Rudy Marchetti remained where he was. He tightened his grip around the cup. He said Rudy would watch you. Anyone I contacted, Rudy would find. And if Rudy discovered I was alive, the first person to pay would be the person I had called. He said it calmly, like he was reading from a price sheet. Daniel raised his eyes, and they were red. He saved my life. I won't deny that. But he also took 3 years from me. I wasn't present at a single funeral. I haven't heard your voice since that day. My daughter was born in a small regional hospital under a name that wasn't mine, and until today, she had never met anyone from her own family. He decided everything. He didn't ask me once." Bianca remained silent. Above them came the sound of small feet running across the floor, followed by Aaron's quiet voice. "There's one more thing," Daniel said. "I think you need to hear it, even though I don't want to tell you." "Tell me." 2 years ago, when I found out you had started working at Vital Holdings, I lost my mind. I wrote to him. I cursed him with words Dad would have slapped me for using. I asked what he intended to do by bringing my sister into this. What did he say? He answered in 3 lines. He wrote, "I've known she was your sister since the day her application reached my desk. I hired her because she would find her way inside this place one way or another. And I would rather have her sitting 100 feet from my office. It's the only place in this city where Rudy Marchetti doesn't dare reach for her." Bianca didn't move. 2 years. 700 days sitting on the 14th floor, believing she was slipping into the tiger's den, believing she was invisible, believing that no one knew who she was. And the man who had never called her by name during those 2 years had known exactly who she was from the first morning. She thought of the 7 seconds of silence after she said the name Callahan's. He hadn't been surprised at all. He had simply been caught. She sat in silence for about a minute. Then something inside her mind locked into place, and it happened so quickly that she shot to her feet and knocked over the cup on the table. "Tell me again about the safe," she said. "What safe?" "The safe on the 2nd floor of the Lake Forest house. Who has the combination?" Daniel frowned. "He does, and the second in command. That rule goes back to his father's time. 2 people have to know it in case one of them dies unexpectedly." Bianca closed her eyes. 4 combinations that hadn't worked. Then 10 days later, the same safe with its handle left in the open position, completely empty except for 1 thin file placed neatly on the middle shelf. No money, no documents, nothing else a man like Damien Vitali would have needed to keep inside his private safe. Only one thing, and that thing had her brother's name on the 2nd line. She had believed she had discovered it. It had been placed there for her to find. "BI? I gave it to the FBI," she said. Daniel stood. "What did you say?" "The 4 photographs. I sat inside the federal office on Roosevelt Avenue and gave them everything. I signed a cooperation agreement. I wore a recording device into his office and asked him about you, and he confessed. He confessed to all of it, and now that recording is in their hands." She heard her voice break. "I just handed the government a forged document and a confession to a crime he didn't commit. Who told you to look inside that safe?" She opened her mouth, and in that moment, 3 years of telephone calls arranged themselves into one perfectly straight line before her eyes. The caller knew which department Daniel had worked in, knew the last day he had appeared at the office, knew where his car had been found before the newspapers reported it. The caller had spent a year constructing a new resume for her and pushing her into exactly the right opening on the 14th floor. The caller had given her 4 combinations to a safe whose code was known by only 2 people in the world. The caller had set a deadline, then extended it, then told her that her mother lived alone in a 1-story house in Peoria, with a back door she didn't lock. Not once had the caller asked her to take money, contracts, or anything else of value. He had needed only one thing, for her to enter that house, believe what he wanted her to believe, and carry it outside for him. For 3 years, she hadn't been searching for the truth. For 3 years, she had been the knife one man sharpened once a week over the telephone. "Bye. Who told you?" Bianca was already reaching for her coat. "I have to go back to Chicago." "Now? It'll be dark soon. Listen to me." She turned back and gripped both of her brother's arms. "For the past 3 years, I always had someone near me down there. I went to work, came home, took the train, and one of his people was always somewhere close. I didn't know it, but they were there. This morning, I left the city alone in a rental car without telling anyone." Daniel's face went white. "You and Aaron pack now," she said. "Leave within an hour. Don't take the state road. Don't stop at any gas station for the first 25 miles. Bye. You have a daughter, Daniel." He didn't argue again. She hugged him once, fiercely and quickly, then walked out the door. Upstairs, a child who had just awakened was laughing. Bianca wouldn't allow herself to turn around and look. During the 4-hour drive back, she covered the first 75 miles without taking her eyes off the rearview mirror. Darkness settled around her. By the time she passed Green Bay, Rain mixed with snow had begun striking the windshield. She called Oswald 3 times, reached voicemail all 3 times, and left a 40-second message saying the document was forged, that someone had planted it inside the safe for her to find, and that Oswald had to call her back immediately. She called Thomas Brennan. The line was busy. She called the landline in Damien's office, and it rang until the call disconnected on its own. At around 7 that evening, just after she crossed the state line, the phone on the passenger seat lit up, blocked number. Bianca watched it glow through 4 rings. Then she picked it up. "Miss Callahan," the voice said. This time, it didn't pass through the filter that had always made it sound as though it came from inside a pipe. This time, it was clear, warm, and unhurried. The voice of a man who asked whether she was tired and bought her coffee because the place downstairs made it terribly. Bianca felt cold spread down her spine before she even understood why. "Sturgeon Bay is quite a long drive, isn't it?" Rudy Marchetti said. She couldn't speak. The car drifted halfway into the next lane, and she pulled it back. "You've worked very hard for 3 years," he said. "I told you before. You've been the most pleasant part. You. Don't waste time on that. Listen carefully. I'm only saying this once." His voice didn't rise or fall. 11 o'clock tonight. Your father's bakery in Bridgeport. You still have the key to the back door, don't you?" "No, that's right. You lost it." Bianca stared straight into the darkness ahead. "Come alone," Rudy said. "If you call the federal authorities, I'll know within 4 minutes. If you call my nephew, I'll know that too. And if you're thinking of turning around and heading north again, go ahead. I've had people up there since noon." The call ended. Bianca drove another 1.25 miles before pulling onto the shoulder. She opened the car door and retched onto the dirty snow beside the highway, both hands gripping the frame while sleet struck the back of her neck. Then she sat behind the wheel again, wiped her mouth, switched on the turn signal, and pulled back into the nearest lane. The dashboard clock read 7:28. She had 3.5 hours left. She reached 31st Street at 5 minutes to 11. The metal security gate had been raised. In the 5 years since the bakery closed, she had passed this place 4 times and had never once dared to stop. And now it stood wide open, yellow light spilling onto the sidewalk from 2 ceiling bulbs she had believed had burned out long ago. Inside, everything remained exactly where it had been beneath 5 years of dust. The glass display case, the brass scale, the oak dough table her father had never allowed anyone to place anything on. Rudy Marchetti sat in a chair pulled into the middle of the floor, his wool coat draped across his knees, while 2 men stood at opposite ends of the room. "You're on time," he said. "I like that about you." Bianca stopped 3 steps away. "What do you want?" "I want this finished." He looked at his watch. "Sit down. We're expecting a guest." 3 minutes later, a car stopped outside. Damien entered alone, carrying a leather briefcase. He wasn't wearing an overcoat. He saw Bianca first, and looked at her for exactly 1 second. And in that second she understood only one thing, that he had known she would be here, and had come anyway. "Let her go," Damien said. "Put the briefcase down first." Damien placed it on the dough table. Rudy lifted his chin, and one of the 2 men opened the locks, raised the lid, pulled out the papers inside, skimmed through them, and nodded. "Everything," Damien said. "The port, the union, 3 construction companies, and 2 transportation companies. Signed. Only the recipient's name is missing." Rudy leaned back in the chair. He smiled for the first time that night, and the smile was still as warm as it had been when he placed a cup of coffee on her desk on the 14th floor. "Do you know how long I've waited for that paper? 3 years. Ever since the night you pulled that accountant out of his car on Torrance Avenue." He pointed toward Bianca. "And this one took me another 3 years. Do you have any idea how difficult it is to find someone who hates exactly where you need her to hate, who has no record, and who is intelligent enough to get through the interview process? I paid her tuition. I even chose the program she studied." Bianca didn't move. "The 4 safe combinations were false," he told her, his voice almost gentle. "I wanted you to fail the first time. People believe completely in something only when they've suffered to obtain it. The second time, I left the safe open for you." Then he turned toward Damien. "You thought keeping her 100 feet from your office would make her safe. I didn't need to reach into that place. I only needed to tell her to walk out." Damien said nothing for a moment. He looked around the bakery, at the glass display case, the brass scale, then down at the oak table beneath his hand. "Why did you choose this place?" he asked. To bring everything full circle, Rudy said. I like things to come full circle. Do you know whose name is still on the deed? Rudy hesitated for half a second. Damien raised his eyes. I didn't come here to make a trade, he said. I came here to buy time. No one in the room moved. 4 months ago, I sat inside a windowless room on Roosevelt Avenue, Damien said, across from an agent named Karen Oswalt. I signed a cooperation agreement. I gave them the Calumet Harbor Ledger, the 3 Michigan transportation routes, and the name of the man who signed the order from August 3 years ago. In return, I asked for 2 things: immunity for Daniel Callahan and immunity for his sister. Rudy rose from the chair. You lied to me for 30 years, Damien said. I only needed to lie to you for 4 months. You're making this up. Try walking out the door. One of the 2 men took 2 steps toward the glass entrance, then froze. Across the street, none of the buildings had their lights on. But at the eastern end of the block, a small truck had been parked there since before Bianca arrived. And at the western end stood 2 more. It's been 20 minutes, Damien said. They're waiting for me to walk through that door. Rudy Marchetti didn't shout. He didn't curse. For those 2 seconds, his face simply lost everything that had been built over it during 70 years. And what remained was an old man watching his entire life being taken away. Then his hand moved beneath the wool coat draped across the chair. Bianca stood 3 steps from Rudy. Damien stood 4 steps from her on the other side of the dough table. She saw him move before she understood what was happening, and he didn't step back. He came forward, and he came forward very fast. He placed himself between her and the other man. There was an explosion. It tore through the empty room of brick and glass, so loud that her ears stopped hearing for several seconds, leaving only one long, hollow ringing. The front glass door shattered. There came the sound of many feet, voices shouting short commands, someone yelling not to move, someone else ordering everyone to get down. Blue and red lights swept into the bakery through the broken doorway, crossing the glass display case, crossing the brass scale, crossing the oak dough table. Once, then again, steady and unending. Bianca was on the floor. She couldn't remember how she had gotten there. Damien lay beside her with his eyes still open, and he was trying to say something. She bent close to his face. He managed 2 words. He asked whether she was all right. She placed both hands against his chest and pressed down with all her strength, exactly as people were supposed to do, and she heard herself calling his name again and again, though she couldn't hear the sound of her own voice. Someone knelt on his other side. Someone pulled her back by the shoulders, and she fought against them. The blue and red lights kept sweeping across the room. Outside, the sirens drew closer. 2 of them, then 3. Her hands were wet, and she didn't dare look down at them. She only stared into his face and held on that way until 4 people in reflective jackets rushed inside, and one of them told her, very loudly and very slowly, that she had to let go now. He made it through. 11 hours in surgery at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, followed by 4 days without regaining consciousness. And then, on a Friday morning, a nurse came into the hallway and called her name. Outside his room, 2 officers from the United States Marshals Service sat on plastic chairs 24 hours a day, and on the right side of the bed, his wrist was secured to the metal frame by a handcuff. Bianca looked at the cuff, then sat down. "How is Daniel?" he asked. His voice was still hoarse. "He's safe at home. Aaron and Lily are too." "Good." He closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again. "And your mother?" They brought her down to Chicago. By noon, Karen Oswalt arrived alone, carrying a case file. She pulled a chair to the foot of the bed and came directly to the point. "Mr. Vitale, I'm going to read this to you, and then you'll sign it. You're pleading guilty to 1 count under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. Your cooperation is fully documented in the report submitted to the court. The prosecution will recommend approximately 5 years. With credit for time served and the conditions of your sentence, you'll realistically spend about 3 years inside. And Bianca Callahan? Full immunity. For her and her brother. You secured that 4 months ago." Oswalt pushed the papers closer. "Would you like your attorney to review them first?" "No." He signed with his left hand because his right wrist was cuffed, the signature unsteady, 2 letters and 3 characters. Oswalt put the file away, gave Bianca a very slight nod, then stepped outside and closed the door behind her. Only the sound of the heart monitor remained in the room. "Ask me," Damien said. I know you still have one question. Bianca straightened in her chair. 2 years, she said. 700 days. You knew who I was from the first day. You knew why I came to work there. You knew my brother was alive. You knew who was calling me. And you didn't say a single word. Her voice was steadier than she had expected. You let me live for 3 years believing my brother was dead. You sat one wall away from me and listened while I told you about my father, and you said nothing. Why? He didn't answer immediately. He stared at the ceiling for a while. Because all my life, I've only known how to take what I wanted and call it protection, he said. He no longer spoke to her with the formality he had used before, and she recognized that this was how he sounded when he told the truth. Your brother. I took 3 years of his life and called it saving him. I kept you where I could see you, and called it keeping you safe. That night you stood in my office with a recording device beneath your clothes. I knew it was there. I still said those words because I had calculated that the federal authorities would have to take you away, change your name, move you to another state, and keep you somewhere my uncle couldn't reach. He turned his head and looked at her. I had calculated everything before you walked into the room. I had simply never once asked whether that was what you wanted. Bianca couldn't speak. I kept you safe without ever asking whether you wanted to be kept, Damien said. That isn't love. It's possession. My father called what he did to me protection too. It took me 37 years to understand the difference, and I understood it on the night you told me, not in this room. A cart rolled past in the hallway. There was only one time in 2 years when I did the right thing, he said. Only once. It was when I stepped back half a pace and asked you. Bianca lowered her head. Her hands rested on her knees, and she looked at them, remembered 4 days earlier, and closed them tightly. 3 weeks later, on the day he was discharged and transferred into custody, they gave her 10 minutes with him in the 7th floor hallway. He wore a gray prison uniform, his hands held in front of him, while a deputy marshal stood 2 steps away. An envelope was tucked beneath his arm. Take it, he said. What is it? Open it and you'll know. He held it out with both hands because they were restrained together. Don't open it here. The deputy signaled that it was time. Damien walked 3 steps, then turned back. Bianca. It was the first time in 2 years that he had called her by name. Don't come to visit me, he said. Not because I don't want to see you, because this time, I'm letting you decide for yourself. Then he walked away. The elevator doors closed. Bianca sat on a plastic chair in the hallway and tore open the envelope right there because she couldn't wait. Inside was a set of property documents, a copy of a real estate transfer deed, the parcel number, and the address of a storefront on 31st Street in Bridgeport. The buyer was a limited liability company she had never heard of. The notarization date appeared in the upper right corner. August 27th, 3 years earlier. 5 days after the night of heavy rain on Torrance Avenue. Attached to the final page was a small handwritten note, the ink already faded, containing only a few words stating that the seller had turned over 2 keys to the back door, both of them originals. Bianca sat on that plastic chair for a very long time. Then she raised a hand to her neck, to the place where a chain had rested for 3 years. And this time she didn't feel that emptiness. She knew where her key was, and now she knew who had been holding the other one, and for how long. Callahan's Bakery reopened on a Saturday morning in September, 2 months after Bianca carried the deed to the county recorder's office and transferred the property into her name. It had taken her nearly a year to make that day possible. She had to apply for a new food safety permit, replace the entire electrical system, and hire someone to repair the old oven that everyone told her to throw away, and that she stubbornly refused to surrender. On the first day, she sold everything before 11 o'clock, mostly because the entire neighborhood came to see the place, and 2 elderly women stood crying on the sidewalk because they remembered her father. Daniel returned to Chicago the following spring, after the trial ended and his records were restored. It took him 4 months to rebuild his documents, obtain a new driver's license, and explain to the bank why a man with a death certificate was now sitting across the desk from them. Aaron found work at an elementary school 3 blocks from their home, and Lily was 5 years old now. She called her Aunt Bianca, sat on the tall chair beside the glass display case every Sunday morning, and was given the important task of counting the croissants, which she always counted wrong by exactly 1. Once, she watched her father standing silently in the middle of the bakery, staring up at the old wooden sign, then turned and asked why grown people cried so often. No one could answer her. Daniel simply lifted her into his arms and said it was because grown people remembered things for a very long time. Margie Doyle worked the counter on Saturday mornings. She was 77 years old, didn't need the money, and said plainly that staying home alone left her hands with nothing to do. She remembered regular customers' names after meeting them exactly twice, and she wrapped bread more securely than anyone else. Thomas Brennan delivered flour on Tuesday and Friday mornings in an old truck he bought after leaving his job, and he never accepted payment for the deliveries and never explained why. Then, on a March morning, the bell above the door rang close to 7 o'clock, when the bakery had been open for only half an hour. Bianca was bending down to remove a tray from the oven. She heard the bell and called out that she would be there in a moment, and when she turned around, a man was standing in the middle of the bakery. He was much thinner. There was gray in his hair at both temples. He wore an ordinary cloth coat, the kind sold almost anywhere, and he carried nothing in his hands. They looked at each other across the tiled floor. "I didn't know whether you wanted me to come," Damien said, "so I came to ask." Bianca placed the tray of bread on the oak table. She stood there for a long moment, still wearing her oven mitts. Then she said, "Do you know how to knead dough?" "No." "Then take off your coat." He ruined the first 3 batches. He added too much water to the first. He kneaded the second so aggressively that she had to tell him dough wasn't something that could be subdued by force. He let the third rise too long, because he became distracted listening to her speak with a customer. When he stood staring at the collapsed dough inside the bowl after the third batch, wearing the expression of a man who had just lost a very large wager, Bianca began to laugh. She laughed until she had to brace herself against the edge of the table, laughed until tears ran down her face, and she couldn't tell whether she was laughing or crying, and perhaps she was doing both. The man who had once made an entire city fall silent was standing in her father's bakery with flour covering his hands, having no idea what to do with a bowl of ruined dough. He learned slowly, but he came faithfully. 6 o'clock every morning, exactly on time, never once late. He didn't speak much. He didn't ask her about the future. He simply came, worked, and went home. And every day, before doing anything inside that bakery, he asked first, even when all he wanted to do was move a chair. Beside the back door, on the wooden hook her father had driven into the wall 28 years earlier, hung a metal ring. On that ring were 2 worn brass keys, identical down to every tooth, hanging side by side, and each morning, whoever arrived first took the ring down to open the door, while each evening, whoever left last placed it back on the hook. This story leaves us with 3 things that perhaps we should carry with us. The first is that respecting someone means asking them, not deciding for them and calling it protection. Many of us love another person by arranging that person's life, hiding truths we believe are too heavy for them, and choosing the road we think will keep them safe. But true love always leaves the other person with the right to know and the right to choose. Keeping someone without ever asking whether they want to be kept isn't love. It is possession. The second is that hatred is the easiest thing in the world for someone else to steer. For 3 years, Bianca lived according to a truth written for her by the very enemy who wanted her to believe it. Before allowing hatred to lead the way, stop and ask one very simple question. Who benefits when I hate this person? That question may save an entire life. The third is that no one is invisible. For 2 years, no one inside that 14-story building could remember her face, but she was still a human being, with a father, a brother, a bakery, and a private sorrow of her own. A person's worth doesn't depend on how useful they are, on their job title, or on whether other people notice them. The clerk you pass every morning, the person who cleans your workplace, the quiet figure sitting in the corner of a meeting room, all of them are carrying a story you have never stopped to ask about. If today's story touched you, please subscribe to our channel, press the like button, and share it so that each day we can continue listening together to more meaningful stories. How did this story make you feel? And has anyone in your life ever made a decision for you because they loved you? Or have you ever done the same thing to someone you cared about? Please leave a comment below. We truly want to hear the feelings that come from the deepest part of your heart. We wish everyone watching this video strong health, a joyful life, and peace in every day ahead. Goodbye, and we'll see you again in the next video.